now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sri Lanka.
For his very comprehensive report. My plea in the late hours of this session is for caution, restraint, and a carefully considered approach to this concept with which we have had a mixed experience. The introduction of the responsibility to protect has challenged the natural order of the international system by providing a different understanding of state sovereignty, including state accountability. When one makes a reference to this doctrine, it is clear that even though there is a tension between the state sovereignty and the defense of human rights, it is possible to overcome this clash by looking at sovereignty as the state's responsibility towards the protection of its own citizens, rather than merely as a tool for unbridled power. Through the promotion of ideals like those of mutual support and protection of human rights, this assembly evoked substantial attention as the international community came to appreciate that the international institutions can play a very relevant role within the UN system. In the 1990s, we will recall, this became even more exaggerated when we witnessed two serious humanitarian crises, which we are familiar with. That arose due to reasons of ethnicity by undermining the credibility of the UN as an international institution that seeks to protect human rights. Among the responses of the community, one voice stood out from the others. It was that of former UN Secretary General late Kofi Annan, who advocated for the reinterpretation of the concept of state sovereignty. Not only did he promote the idea that state sovereignty has to be understood as a tool at the service of people and not the other way around, but also that the UN Charter had been created with the goal of defending human beings and their fundamental rights and not those who abuse them. He then affirmed that consequently also the idea of national interest should be revisited by considering it more as a collective interest. It is therefore necessary, Madam Chair, that we approach this sensitive concept with caution and take a balanced view. It must be approached with restraint. It has to be said that the R2P's doctrine specifies that the primary responsibility to protect relies within the state itself and not with the international community. The general idea is that sovereignty and military intervention should be seen as a counterbalancing factor, where the latter should be intended only as the last resort to be used. Consequently, the essential element that allows the balance between the two follows the R2P's intention to focus on the durability of sovereignty. However, on the other hand, such an action has been strongly condemned by another part of the community whose criticism can firmly be summarized in 3 points. Firstly, the misuse of the R2P in the rapid resort of military force. Secondly, the war crimes and crimes against humanity committed by alliances in the Middle East that led to the death of many casualties, between 2,000 and 30,000. Finally, the problem of post-alliance action in the Middle East again, where the third pillar of the R2P, that is the responsibility to rebuild, has been put in the back burner by leaving the country in a condition of serious disarray. In relation to the last point, not only have these interventions been faulted for abusing what was stated in the relevant resolution, but also such actions determined the beginning of other problems related to the use of R2P in the future. We must therefore guard against the misuse of such a doctrine. Additionally, the abuse of that resolution has also caused a reinforcement of the lack of confidence from non-Western countries which believe that R2P is only another cover for neo-imperial dominance. The resolution on R2P, ratified by the UN General Assembly in 2005, tried to overcome these tensions, but it still recognized the ultimate authority of the Security Council. Each state had a responsibility to protect its population, the resolution said, but collective action was to be taken through the Security Council. in accordance with the Charter, including Chapter 7, on a case-by-case basis. In other words, only the Security Council could decide whether an intervention of the international community should be undertaken, which implied not only the rights of the veto of the permanent 5 members, but also that the universal humanitarian legal principles supposedly established by the R2P resolution were still subordinate to the principles of national sovereignty, to rights of the permanent members in particular. Why is this relevant? It is relevant because it points to the fact that R2P is a mere aspiration and, as one academic puts it, as opposed to a real principle of international norms or even law. R2P sometimes not only runs against the practices of practical politics, but more importantly, it is at odds with a fundamental principle of the United Nations itself, namely the ultimate legal deference to national sovereignty as decided by national members of the Security Council. The Council may approve of the concept with respect on the one case, but does not do so in the other, the case of another, because certain members of the permanent 5 are at cross purposes. After all is said and done, R2P is not really a principle, but an aspiration, I repeat, and a rather weak one at that. Its defenders often say that intervening in the face of mass murder is an option that cannot be relinquished, cannot be more true. But we don't need R2P, surely, to exercise that option. Ask yourself that question. Whether the UN Security Council authorizes such an intervention will always be a practical judgment at the discretion of sovereign members of the United Nations Security Council, and depending on all sorts of circumstances. And it is these exceptions that shows up the weaknesses of R2P as a principle. The problem with R2P is that it really never lives up to its high-sounding principles. If it wanted to, the Security Council could have intervened to stop genocide in different parts of the world. The reason it didn't are the same ones that will likely keep it from doing so elsewhere in the future. Ultimately, R2P is riddled with too many contradictions and practical problems to make it a serious doctrine for implementation. It mainly comes down to an argument of moral persuasion to intervene against mass murder and genocide, which one can make without resorting to complicated arguments about supposed international principles or even the proper purposes of warfare, and certainly without damaging the vital notion of national sovereignty. After all, Madam Chair, we have a cocktail of mechanisms available to us in dealing with these problems effectively, as the Honorable Ambassador of Korea was pleased to observe this morning. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank you. And